Hello AS, welcome to your next assessment that you will be annotating. So what I want you to be doing here, there's two things, and it's absolutely vital that you do both of these things, and possibly the third thing if you haven't. So we'll start with the third thing that most of you will have, which is a percentage. If you haven't got a percentage, please can you work out what your marks are? The second thing I would like you to do is go through and annotate your exam paper, making notes of anything you didn't get full marks on. And if I were you, even for some of the ones that you did get full marks on, just check that why you've got those full marks, make sure you're clear and make sure that you can replicate that in the future. And finally, and most importantly, or equally as importantly, I would also like you to tick the boxes. Tick all the ones that you did get full marks in, or very, very close to full marks, and then leave the ones blank that you didn't. They are for revision, and the reason they're left blank rather than crossed is because you are going to be able to tick them later on when you have completed some revision. Okay, so pause, work out your percentage if you need to, then go through and annotate this before you tick your boxes. So question 14, or the first one on your exam paper, the answer is no, it should not be directional. As long as you've made it clear that no, it's not. No, it should be not. No, it should not be directional. It should be non-directional. If you made any reference to that, then you get a mark. And then this is the thing that worried me a little bit, and hopefully people are thinking carefully about why I ask them to do their homeworks and why I ask you to do things repetitively. The reason it is non-directional, should be non-directional, and we've done this 100 times, is there is no reference to evidence that allows psychologists to predict the direction of the results. There is no previous research conducted, and we've talked about that a lot before, so I just want you to kind of reflect on maybe why some of you weren't able to achieve that mark. So pause and have a think. Why didn't you get it? Why had you forgotten it? And what could you do differently so next time I ask that question you would know information that was right back from the start of the course, especially as it was something that was mentioned on the list of things you needed to revise as well. The mark is 55%, so 22 divided by 40 equals 0.55 times by 100 equals 55%. So 22 was the number over the total number, which was 40, so 22 divided by 40 equals 0.55 times 100, 55%. Question 16, which was explain how. Sampling methods, let me just get the worksheet in front of me. There you go, I knew I needed it in front of me. Explain why using stratified sampling might improve this study. I was really surprised to see a very small number of you using the point explain evaluation structure. Can you all make a note, even if you've got full marks on this one, explain why is almost always, and you'll see later on why this isn't an example of when you would use that, but almost always is asking for you to give an evaluation point. So explain why stratified sampling might improve this study. A strength of stratified sampling is, and I'm sure you've all noticed as well, and some of you may have slipped through the net, so again check you might have got 2 marks, but check you've done this, because I didn't see it as much as I hoped I would. Might improve this study, so you need to contextualise. If you haven't contextualised and you've got through 2 marks, you can breathe a sigh of relief, or if you haven't contextualised and you haven't got any marks, just remember, for both of you, remember that you must contextualise if it says in this study. So strength of stratified sampling is that it collected a representative sample of the students from sixth form, so I've underlined it and bolded it where I've contextualised it. This is a strength because it allows us to generalise the results to the target population. A strength of stratified sampling is that it removes investigator bias, and that the investigator cannot pick the students which were able to concentrate better to music. This is a strength because it reduces extraneous variables, increasing the validity, so we can be more confident it is music affecting concentration. So we don't say cause and effect, we replace cause and effect with 2 words that we're actually looking at in the stimulus, so music and concentration. I was probably quite generous, but I didn't accept anything else other than those evaluation points because they are the ones we've looked at in class. I've had a few people mention they don't feel very confident about the evaluation points. The last session we did on research methods, I provided you all with a booklet which had the evaluation points in, so I'd like you to go and look for that, and I will just bring a copy of that up so you can see what it looks like. 1 second. There you go. It looks like this research methods evaluation book, and it's probably blank for a lot of you, but a lot of you have mentioned concerns about not having the evaluation points. Here they are. There is an entire book full of every single evaluation point that you need to know. I'm giving you the first evaluation point, which is provided in the flipped learning, so you should be aware of it anyway. You can go back and watch it on the video. Then you need to decide why it's a strength or why it's a weakness. I've met with some very sensible people who have brought me their booklets filled in and asked me to go through them, and I'm more than happy to do that with anybody who would like to outside of class. So please let me know, and please look for this evaluation booklet. If you're sat there thinking, well, the reason I didn't do very well, Harriet, is because I didn't know the evaluation points because they're not written down, then you have an opportunity to put it into this evaluation book. Okay, we skip forward slightly. There we go, from current slide. Right, so can you, again, if you haven't, circle explain why. Explain why almost always without fail is asking you to use a point explain sentence. A strength is, this is a strength because, and then of course this study you must contextualise. Question 17. This one was a real tricky one, and I marked this in the summer because this is the exam paper that you did in the summer, or that the AS in the last year did in the summer. Explain what is meant by for primary data. They had a very specific idea of what they wanted, which some of you may have got some of the marks for, but the key thing they wanted to see, and if you didn't say this you wouldn't get the mark, is original first-hand responses of participants. They wanted to see the word first-hand in there, which I saw in some people's, which was brilliant, or and as well as that collected specifically for the research being carried out. But you didn't get any credit if you suggested the data was collected by the researcher. So what that means is that because primary and secondary data is both collected by the researcher. Primary data is first-hand experiences, secondary data is collected by the researcher off the internet, from a book, wherever it might be, so you shouldn't say collected by the researcher. If you think, the reason I'm pausing on this one a little bit is because if you think you've got that second bullet point and you think you've spotted it, bring it into me, tell me that you think you've got it, and then we can see if we can tweak your mark and possibly add one mark on there where you've mentioned collected specifically for the research being carried out. But really you did need to use the phrase first-hand or original data. Okay. Question 18. Explain one reason why. So this is one reason why, and again it's explain why. So as you would all know, you need to use the point explain structure. So can you highlight the words explain and why? And that should be the point explain. It even has the explain in it. And on the mark scheme, the exact words that you use are identify and elaborate, and it's exactly the same thing. Identify is the point, elaborate, tell me why it's a strength or a weakness. So the reason I'm teaching you like this is because it's mentioned specifically on the mark scheme. A strength of the mean is that it takes into account all the scores in the data set, and this is a strength because it makes it more sensitive measure of data. I had a lot of people say it's an appropriate method to use because there are no extreme scores, which is not the case. There are some extreme scores. There are some scores that kind of stand out that are a little bit higher, like 105 for example in task B maybe. So there are some extreme scores, so that wouldn't be a valid point. What I wanted to see was a strength of a mean as it takes into account all the scores. This is a strength because it makes it a more sensitive measure of data. So I wanted you to structure it like an evaluation point, and I asked Andy to provide me with that evaluation point, so I know it's what you were delivered in class. You get the same thing again. You get 630 divided by 10, which makes 63 seconds, and 774 divided by 10, which makes 77.4 seconds as well for your marks there. Unfortunately, and I think this is very cruel, but for some reason they do it, they didn't want you to round because they didn't say you needed to. So if you rounded, then I'm really sorry I wasn't able to give you a mark, which was such a shame, but unfortunately, just remember for next time. Be confident you knew the data, you knew how to calculate it, and you just need to remember it for next time. Okay. This next question, question 20, was absolutely ever so upsetting to mark, just like it was in the summer as well, because you didn't get any marks if you used any of the following phrases: decrease, reduce, eliminate, or prevent, stop, anything like that. The only phrase they would accept, and I think some of you when you had the ethics boards this might have been discussed with you, the only one that's accepted is controls for order effect. Loads of people then went on to explain it really well, so, that's why it was so difficult to mark, so don't be disheartened. But for this one, it doesn't get rid of order effects, it just controls or balances it out. So what I want you to think about is, if you were doing a maths exam, if the condition was that you were doing 2 maths exams, and one you did with caffeine and one you did without, or whatever it was, the first time you did the maths puzzle, it would be a bit tricky, you didn't quite get exactly what you wanted to do. The second time you did a similar maths puzzle, you thought, oh yeah, I've got this, makes perfect sense, I can start off straight away knowing what to do. And of course that's practice effect. Now in counterbalancing, if 50 of over 100 sample, if 50 did condition A and then condition B, which condition would the practice effect happen in? So I just want you to think about that for a second. Of course it is condition B, you get better in the second condition. If the other 50 did condition B and then condition A, well, in condition A you would experience practice effect. So in the first 50 a practice effect would be in B, and in the second lot of people the practice effect would be in condition A. Has that got rid of, removed, prevented, stopped practice effect? No, it's just controlled for it by balancing it out equally. So that's a question that something that I want you to consider. So what you should have said is that controls for order effects, and that's really important. It's a good piece of decrease, reduce, eliminate, prevent are not really appropriate psychological terms. If you hear me using them, talking about removing things, then you need to pull me up and you need to say, no, Harry, it means control. You have control for extraneous variables, control for order effect. You want to get the terminology right. It allows for an order effect to be distributed evenly across both conditions. So 50% of 50 of the condition B's practice effect happened in, 50 of the condition A's practice effect happened in. Making each condition of the IV occur as the first task and the second task equally. Okay, then question 21, part 1. Loads of different things you could have talked about. Level of difficulty, wearing headphones, type of music, instructions to participants, characteristics of the psychologist, environmental conditions, but you wouldn't get any credit for talking about participant variables, so a difference between the participant, because they are the same person in condition A as they are in condition B. It is repeated measures, so that participant variable is controlled for. You could say, so for example, if you said how good they were at crosswords, well, they might be really, really brilliant, but we'd still see if there was a difference between the first and the second condition, because we're comparing someone who's really good and seeing if they get better or worse, not comparing two people. So remember, repeated measures is when both people do that. So if you are ever asked in the future when you're doing an exam to suggest an extraneous variable, the first thing you must do is check whether it's repeated measures. If it's repeated measures, then there's nothing to do with participant variables. Okay. The other thing that I wouldn't accept, oh no, that's it, I think. So if you spotted any on there, and with this one, I was potentially, so I'm thinking about a couple where I might not have given you the mark, and actually I think that now looking at this list, I think you could. So if you feel that any of those that I haven't given you a mark for, that you deserve one, please come and let me know, and I'll remark your paper. I'm more than happy to do that. So what you need to do is you need to name the IV, so all the examples on the other piece of the other slide. Name the IV, explain how it might affect the DV, and explain how it might affect the experiment, and explain how it might affect the DV. So I said the temperature in the room. The room could be warmer for some students than others, so that's contextualizing it, linking it back to the study. This might be what affects their ability to concentrate, not the music or no music. So you might say how it might affect the experiment. Well, one room might be warmer than another. How does it happen with the experiment, and how might that impact the DV? Well, how it might link to their this might be what affects their ability to concentrate, not the music or no music. 22, again, explain how the following study could be said to be an improvement on the original study. What they wanted to hear here was about how the follow-up study was better than the original study, which most of you did, which a lot of people in the summer didn't, so that's really, really good. Again, you wanted to be, I would have gone with the evaluation, the P structure, because it talks about an improvement. So a strength of the second study is the participants are empirically tested. This is a strength because it does not rely on self-awareness like the first study, which used self-report. So all of that terminology. I saw people start to touch on that, which was really brilliant. I was really, really thrilled they did that really, really well. However, because it wasn't clearly structured, you didn't always manage to access the higher marks. So be pleased you know the information, but next time see the word improvement, use the evaluations, and because it's improvement, they only want to hear the strengths. Another strength of the follow-up study is the DV is measured in time. This is a strength because it's more objective, so there's no room for bias or people's opinions or interpretations. It is objective, it is free from bias, and scientific, removing issues such as social desirability you would experience in self-report. I saw lots of people use the term social reliability, which was social desirability, which was really, really good. A strength of the second study is that it removed social desirability bias by measuring the effect of music on concentration directly. This increases the validity as we can be more confident the follow-up study is measuring what it claims to measure. You certainly wouldn't have had to mention all of those, but I would have said 2 out of those 3 evaluation points you would have made reference to. Something else that you could have mentioned, you've manipulated the IV, so can be confident of cause and effect. So we know we've been able to change the IV. It's not been relying on anything else. It's not been a quasi. It's not been a natural experiment. We've gone right before and after. No contextualising, no marks, and I don't think I saw anybody not contextualise, so that was brilliant. 2 other things to add to this. When people talked about using quantitative instead of qualitative, the self-report was closed questions, and therefore both were quantitative, so you didn't get any marks. Both use repeated measures, so participant variables are not applicable, and I've been a bit harsh about this one, because of the previous mention of counterbalancing in the follow-up study, and because it's already asked in the exam, I've not allowed that either. I know that's something that might be allowed more at GCSE, but in A-level it's not something that would be accepted. If it's been previously mentioned, then you want to try and think of something else to talk about when it's so directly said about the purpose of counterbalancing. So I didn't accept those either. So both studies were quantitative data, and therefore you couldn't get any marks for that, and both used repeated measures, not just the second one. Briefly outline the process of synaptic transmission. You get 1 mark for the reference for the release of neurotransmitters into the synapse, and 1 mark for reference to the neurotransmitters binding with the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. So that wording comes from the exam about the dendrites or the next neuron, but the key things I wanted to see were the neurotransmitters being released into the synapse, so it is the neurotransmitters that are released into the gap, and the neurotransmitters binding with receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. I was a little bit worried for some of you. Some of you need to focus on that and work and develop that one a little bit more. Please do not steer away from it because you're not sure of it. Please have a go at researching it and going through it. Okay. This one, which was I think for most of you we looked at after you had done your assessment, but I was thrilled that quite a few of you still seem to get this, which was really good, but it is something to develop and work on. Neurotransmitters can be excitatory or inhibitory, so you get a mark for that. If the neurotransmitter is excitatory, nothing else, the neurotransmitter excitatory, then the postsynaptic neuron is more likely to fire an action potential. If the neurotransmitter is inhibitory, then the postsynaptic neuron is less likely to fire an action potential. And then the excitatory and the inhibitory influences are summed. If the net effect on the postsynaptic neuron is inhibitory, if there are more inhibitory neurotransmitters, the neuron will be less likely to fire. And if the net effect is excitatory, if there are more excitatory neurotransmitters, the neuron will be more likely to fire. Please be prepared for us to go through that many, many times until you are all 100% confident with it. So the quicker you become comfortable explaining it and sharing it with me, the quicker we can move on. And then maximum 2 marks reference without summation, which a lot of you referred to, which was really, really good. Explain the actions of the autonomic nervous system. You get 2 marks for knowing about the autonomic nervous system. So 1 mark for talking about the sympathetic nervous system, responds to a perceived threat, it produces psychological changes that physiological changes that prepare the body for fight or flight. And the other section, the parasympathetic section, restores normal physiological functioning when the threat has passed. If you made any references like that, you got 2 marks. This was very well answered. 1 mark for application to the sympathetic activity. Breathing quickens, mouth dries, heart pounds. And 1 mark to link to the parasympathetic. Breathing slows down and becoming calm. Generally, most of you got full marks for that one. The ones that didn't get full marks were the ones who didn't mention the parasympathetic nervous system. So they were the ones who didn't talk about it. And when you read the whole of the stimulus, it talks about your breathing slows down after a couple of minutes, you're walking home calmly with your friend. Why would they mention that? They wouldn't put that in unless they wanted you to refer to it. So make sure you use all of the stimulus. Okay. Now what I'd like you to do is go to the front of your exam paper, tick everything that you have managed to get very close to full marks on, leave anything blank that you need to revise. And what I'd like you to do, if you identified anything that you consistently made a mistake, so for example, if when you said explain why, the phrase explain why, you didn't use the evaluation structure, or you didn't contextualize, or whatever it was, I'd like you to make a note where it says, how could you improve this for next time? Tell me how you could improve. When I put either this exact same exam paper in front of you again, if I'm concerned about how well you achieved on it, or if I put forward another, give you another exam paper, how could you avoid that